Hello, everyone. Welcome into another episode of Bolt Breakdowns here on the Guilty as Charged podcast YouTube channel. My name is Alex. I am your host as always. And I thought I was going to open the show giving you a whole rant about how the Chargers were indeed the same old Chargers. But luckily, I do not have to give that rant tonight, as they said, not today on the final drive. And Herbert and Ladd and a combination of folks end up pulling through after the Chargers get a little bit of field goal luck their way in the second half, but we'll talk about everything and everything that went down, because what a crazy game to watch. Certainly, probably the biggest, I would say, Chargers regular season win in quite some time. Harbaugh talked about kind of showing the team some mental, doubters from the media about the quarterbacks they played, about the teams they played, and even to some extent, not as a member of the media, but we had questions about what this Chargers team was. I think we saw the signs and everything that was good with the defense when they were playing, maybe some subpar offenses and subpar quarterbacks that could be translated when they played a good team. But the Bengals, obviously, playing them, they're a supercharged offense, right? And we saw some of that tonight, obviously, with Burrow and Chase and Higgins back in the fold for them. But this was really going to be a litmus test of where are the Chargers, not necessarily between, oh my God, they're, maybe a quasi playoff team in the Super Bowl, but can they kind of stick around with the big boys? And someone asked, I think, in the chat this week, what would the Chargers kind of need to have in that stretch for me to believe they were contenders, talking about the stretch of the Bengals, the Ravens, the Falcons, Bucks, and Chiefs, right? And I said that to me, they have to win at least 2 of the 3 or win 3 of the 3 between the Bengals, the Ravens, and the Chiefs before I kind of fully believed, so to speak, that they could be a Super Bowl contender. And so far, I still don't know if I ultimately believe they are a Super Bowl team, but they certainly are a playoff contender. They are the lone 5th seed in the AFC, which we'll get to in a bit. I think this was a game where you found out kind of what the Chargers were made of, certainly based on the first half, but also the second half and mental resiliency, right? I think the Chargers, under different leadership, with a different version of Herbert, with a different kind of locker room dynamic in terms of people taking accountability and all stuff like that, I don't know if they win this game tonight. I don't think they do in previous years. And we've seen the Chargers lose a lot of big leads before, whether it was Staley era or Lynn era or whatever era you want to go to, right? But yeah, this was a team that had what happened in Jacksonville happen, and a lot of those guys still on the still on this version of the team, a different version, albeit everything considered, but still have memories of that, or some of the collapses just I can think of that have happened in the last couple of years, like the Denver loss back in 2020, right? So the mental resiliency to have that lead, kind of choke the lead with their play, but still come through, I don't think should be undersold, even though obviously it wasn't an optimal second half. But to have Herbert, who had gone through, I think, 7 straight incompletions, as well as, just a lot of kind of yips on some of his throws going into that final drive, whether it was, kind of putting too much heat, to the outside on a ball for QJ, or even the Ladd throw, which wasn't his best. And if he puts that a little bit better, Ladd's walking into the end zone on that play, potentially, with where the defense was. Not your ideal Herbert game necessarily, not your ideal game from a variety of other players, but they still found a way, obviously, to grit it out. And shout out to Justin Herbert, who I think had a great first half, literally as perfect a first half as a first half can be. Struggled mightily in the second half, and yet, was still able to turn it around and, kind of find his magic when he needed it, much like when the Bengals were not able to take, advantage of their opportunities, and the Chargers go right down the field and score after 2, big chunk plays to McConkey. And then, finishing off with Dobbins' run, which, shout out to, everyone there on those sorts of plays where it just felt like the Chargers' hard effort, was rewarded to such an extent where, Quentin Johnson opens up a pretty big block for that J.K. Dobbins final run, even though, as a receiver, he struggled today. He was still dialed in kind of on that aspect, right? And I think you could say that about a lot of players who didn't necessarily have their best games today, but, showed up when it mattered most, right? And that was kind of Harbaugh's quote post-game. But again, like I said, I don't know if the Herbert or the Derwin or some of these key other players who've been involved in previous iterations of the Chargers feel as confident as they probably did in the fourth quarter, where it's like, no, we still got this, right? So I definitely think that is, again, part of the regime change, part of the culture change. As I mentioned with Herbert, tough second half, ultimately turns it around for the final drive to more resemble what he was doing in the first half. So credit to him again for coming through. You can't talk about this version of the Chargers without talking about him, obviously. But the development from him has been great. He was great for, I would say 2.5 quarters tonight. Obviously fumbles and, a couple errant throws got in the way. I do definitely think the pressure got to him in terms of the yips and maybe some of those old memories of the past combined with the Bengals. Obviously, pass rushing a little bit better, but he was nails on that final drive, and it was exactly when it needed to be. Obviously, you want to hope the consistency comes going forward, but that was huge. Lad McConkey, 6 receptions, 123 yards, 20.5 yards per catch as I read the stats. And, what can you say? He is the best route runner on the team. He is, I don't know if he's going to get Rookie of the Year votes with how things are going, but he's certainly someone that I did not think would just step on the field and have quite immediate as an impact he would have on, now week 1 through, essentially week 11. So that was really great to see from Lad, who I think has, again, shown why he was picked where he was, and has shown that he's probably, again, one of the Chargers' key elements to sort of maintaining this future. While there will be some, fluctuations, he was obviously the first wide receiver picked by the new regime. So they have plans for McConkey, and McConkey has plans for them. But great stuff to get this kind of Lad game pretty much exactly at the time you needed it, because they really, I think, Lad was injured, and I sort of caught my breath in the first half when he ultimately did come back out of the locker room. But yeah, I'm kind of, as Harbaugh would say, running out of adjectives to describe Lad McConkey, my Chargers twin, who was on the field. But yeah, he's been great nonetheless, and has surpassed essentially every expectation, I think. I would say, even as a fan of his during the draft, it has surpassed every expectation that I would say I have for him in year 1. I want to talk about Dobbins a little bit, who kind of goes under the radar in this game. 11 carries, 56 yards, not necessarily anything special. Averages 5.1 a carry, but that was a little bit skewed, obviously, by the touchdown run towards the end. But, Dobbins also had a key play on that field goal drive, where he was about to get hit 5 yards into the backfield, and he bounces off defenders somehow, even not necessarily at his age, but given his physical condition, given everything he's been through. It was nice to see that kind of moment play out, I would say, for J.K. Dobbins. So great to see from him. Obviously, I think you can kind of look at the offensive line as a symptom of, the run blocking just kind of isn't where the run blocking should be. But yeah, great stuff. I think from Dobbins when it was needed the most, even though Herbert ended up leading the team in rushing, because he's an absolute freak who can do what he does. And it is funny to just kind of watch Herbert run. He, someone compared him to like one of the Terminators on Twitter, and he fits every part of that. When you run, it is like watching, kind of a version of Lamar that is, coded towards Justin's physical strengths and things like that. But, you don't put a QB spy on him, and, the Bengals eventually make that adjustment in the second half, you're going to pay, right? Wanted to talk about the defense a little bit too. Obviously, don't have a ton of time here with what time it is in the U.S. at this ungodly 2:30, 3 a.m. hour, but shout out, despite all the changes they were going through in this game, with Cam Hart coming out, Christian Fulton being in and out, obviously no Khalil Mack in this game, which I think you could feel the effect on the defense. But still, for it to be very bend, don't break, get some stops in the end, is more than you can ask of a defense that has these players, not necessarily the healthiest, not necessarily, I think, quite as deep of a roster as people would like to admit. But Minter has them playing well, and to the guys like Dion and Derwin's credit, and Poona Ford's credit, and Tierra Tart's credit, they are doing everything they can with the opportunities that they've been given, and just sort of running with it. So all those guys, I think, played super well on the defensive side of the ball. I obviously think this will look a little bit different when Khalil Mack's back. So hopefully, either by next week or the week after, he's kind of able to recover. But you saw what this bend don't break defense can do, even with Christian Fulton coming in and out, even with Eli Apple is on the outside now, which is not something that any Chargers fan would have predicted before the season. John gets burnt on a couple of plays, and you start to lose a little bit of that enthusiasm. But I think this was a great type of game for this defense to just kind of stand put and really be tested in the way they were too. That was not something that we had become accustomed to seeing this season, with obviously the quarterbacks and the opposing offenses they played. Great stuff. Tuli, I thought, was pretty big when it mattered. I think he ended up having 1.5 sacks in this game, but came up with some pretty key run stops as well. Was pretty clearly, I thought, far and away the best edge player in this game, who sort of stepped up and filled that Mac void as much as he was able to. Obviously, this Chargers team is better when you have both of them, kind of full time. But it was great to see that sort of an effort from Tuli, where we may be looking down in not so distant future, depending on what happens with Mac, depending on what happens with Bosa, where he could be the lead guy. And I think he showed you today some of the reasons, he certainly could be that for your defense. Dion and Derwin were flying around. I haven't found the last couple games of Derwin tape necessarily the most positive viewing experience. But this was a game where I thought he was pretty surgical, in what he needed to do. Dion as well, sort of being in that middle, in that second level for sure. So it was great to see that from them. A few confusing Minter calls. I didn't really understand going cover 0 on the Jamar Chase 4th and goal early in that game. So a couple schematic questions for him, where I just think he tried to send a lot of pressure, maybe where it necessarily wasn't needed, especially considering the state of the secondary. But overall, I mean, you have to be thrilled with how he's doing. And the more that I watch Jesse Minter defenses playing, particularly with key guys out, particularly with some of the circumstances this season, they just kind of keep getting better and better. And I hate to say this, obviously, but I do not think that we ultimately have that much longer with Jesse Minter, as much as I would love him to sign a lifetime contract to retire as the highest paid DC, in the league, or a promise to get him, Harbaugh's job. Somehow we have to find a way to keep him. I don't know if they're going to be able to do that. Getting into some negatives, I did think the run game was obviously a little paltry today. Justin Herbert ended up leading the team in rushing. Dobbins, like I said, did not do bad. He had 11 carries for 56 yards, but I just feel like they have a very instinctual problem that it does exist in the interior offensive line, and that I think is clearly making some of their runs with JK, and others all, kind of worse. So, yeah. On a list of negatives, when you do think of things that are a little Jacksonville game adjacent, if you will, from a couple of years ago, the lack of ability to sort of finish the game, running it out, that is something that I still think plagues this team. Obviously, I do think in future seasons they will figure out kind of the run game component of this more consistently, but with the talent they have on the interior, I just think it's not really quite as achievable right now. So hopefully that is something that they kind of mend going forward and, get this run game going into better shape than it currently is right now. But I think we've seen kind of what the run game is, for better and for worse, over the last 3 or 4 weeks. I think occasionally you'll get Gus Edwards' performance like he did last week, occasionally a big Dobbins run. But I do still think this run game is a little tough to watch. And now the Chargers have the 5th seed in the AFC. They have passed the Baltimore Ravens after the Ravens loss. Today, they would currently face the Houston Texans in the playoff picture, which we were talking about as a potential GAC-Houston meetup, obviously. Very long ways away. They still have to win games to get into the playoffs for sure. But this win was a big win for them in terms of creating a bit of a gulf between, them and the Bengals, and some of the other wild card teams that were in it. Outside of the Chargers being 6-3, you have a bunch of teams with 4 wins, 5 wins. So, to see the Chargers pull this one out was great. I did kind of think, calling a game a must-win at 6-3 is obviously maybe a little bit of overkill at times. But I did think for a couple, particular reasons with this team, this is a game that you wanted to have going into next week. Obviously, I've talked about giving yourself more leeway, more margin for error, if you will. And that was something that stuck out to me. But now we get Harbaugh next week. It'll be the Chargers. It'll be the Ravens, those two brothers going against each other. Harbaugh wanted to kind of talk about what it was like going, against his brother. I think somebody asked him about it at the press conference. He was like, yeah, we'll get to it next week after we celebrate the current win without jumping a couple steps and a couple miles ahead. So thought that was fair. But obviously that's going to be a very big game for the Chargers next Monday night. Huge stuff that could happen in that game if the Chargers are able to extend that winning streak to 5. So this is a little bit of shorter episode of Bolt Breakdowns. I'm proud of this team's mental resilience. I am proud of being a fan and not being let down in the ways that maybe we have been let down before. It was nice to see this team and Harbaugh and Herbert and all these guys, really put their nose to the grindstone. I would say those last 2 one offense, one defense drive, and pulled it together when things were certainly suboptimal. So obviously a lot of things to clean up. I think there's a lot of things to clean up on defense. A lot of injuries to get through on defense, depending on what happens with Cam Hart, depending on what happens with Fulton, depending on what happens with, Mac, who, still has sort of re-aggravated his groin. So a lot of stuff to go through there. Not by any means the perfect offensive game, and the Chargers kind of keep striking. They're really good in the first and second half. The game scripts and everything kind of goes away for them a little bit. But thought this was good. We also do have an addendum to, fully establish now. I did join Tyler on the podcast last week, and, he did not attend the Titans game. So we had a theory that if he did attend this Bengals game and they had lost, we would hashtag ban Tyler from SoFi Stadium, regardless of the season tickets or anything else he has going on in his life. So, the ban Tyler suspension from SoFi Stadium, or whatever you want to call it, has been postponed at least another week before I assume he's going to go to the Ravens game on that Monday night in a little bit. So that will be fun to watch with Harbaugh coming up. That's going to be some really, really, really good stuff. And shout out to the fans, obviously, I think kind of at SoFi as well. Something that I would say I noticed, I've never been to SoFi for a game. I know at some point I'll have to, whether that's this year or next year. But as someone who's watched Chargers games on TV, I remember, going back, every live broadcast for however many years, I've never heard crowds at SoFi or StubHub or anything like what the last 2 weeks have been, where you had the Bengals and Titans having issues starting their offense. So I thought that part of it was really good to see from a Chargers perspective, obviously. And I remember a couple, years ago, they lost an ugly Patriots game on Halloween, and I had Peter Schrager, I think, on the podcast, and he just started talking about, Chargers aren't building that momentum, in LA, and they need to build kind of a consistent winner for people to come, and that was sort of the struggle, I think, of the Staley era, both for fans as well as the team, getting that level of support, and they've obviously had a bunch of guys that have been deserving of that level of appreciation. And so for now, this Harbaugh fabric, this team that people really are excited to watch, finally getting that love, finally getting some real home field advantages. It's great to see, especially in a big primetime game like this one. We'll see what the attendance is kind of like next week, but this is the first week that I've ever watched a SoFi Chargers game, and I'm like, oh, like this is serious stuff where they have a legit home field advantage that that certainly blows out a lot of their other attendances, and maybe is like their best thing since like that 2018 regular season Ravens game where they had some momentum and they had some Chargers fans in the building that were sort of a big thing. So shout out to the production team on game days who works as hard as they do to make it a great experience for the fans, but also shout out to all the Bolt fam for doing what they did today and kind of willing the Chargers to a win. And I know I was nervous at points. I know the stadium was a little quiet, but when they needed the noise the most, the fans were there. So that was really, really great to see. So that'll do it for tonight. A little bit of a shorter episode. I'm up at 2:45 or whatever the hell it is in the morning. So great win. Bolt up. And ultimately, I just want to leave this video by potentially saying, fuck the Bengals, Joe Burrow in that Harris pantsuit.